Hello and welcome to Post to Post, the channel where we discuss all things hockey and all teams. Before we begin, I got a new Edmonton shirt here, so
nice.
all you Oilers fans will be happy to see this in a few videos over the summer. But yeah, we're here to talk about the head-to-head matchup statistics between all the teams in the league. So there's some interesting stats I knew about
Very
before.
interesting.
Mainly, Calgary has not won in Anaheim in 28 games or something insane like that.
Yeah.
So Brad, again.
Once again, Brad.
Shout out to Brad in Newfoundland. Thank you so much for doing these statistic videos for us. So he's gathered all this information, and we're going to tell you what teams have, so for Anaheim, for example, the first one, they play the best against the Philadelphia Flyers. They play the worst against the Pittsburgh Penguins. And we're going to do that for each team and give their percentages, actually. And there's some really interesting stats in here. Some teams have not beaten other teams in 4 years and vice versa. And it's just
And if you're a fan of one of these teams, you know, if you cheer passionately for one of them, as I might for Montreal, the numbers won't be a big surprise when we get to your team. Because you probably know the teams that you hate and the teams that you like to play against.
Yeah.
But I had no idea how different teams do against each other until I saw this work that Brad did.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's just get into this. And we're going to try and do this in alphabetical order. At least I think these are in alphabetical order.
Really?
So that means Anaheim is first, and I've already kind of said it. They play the best against the Philadelphia Flyers, and they've won 100% of their games against Philadelphia in the last 4 years. And these statistics are all in the last 4 years. I don't remember if I mentioned that at the beginning.
And they play the worst against the Pittsburgh Penguins, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Winning only 12.5% of that time.
12.5. I wouldn't have probably guessed that the Anaheim Ducks have lost almost 90% of their games against Pittsburgh.
And you're going to see some even numbers a lot here because, you know, teams in different conferences play each other twice.
Yeah.
Once in each arena in each year. So that shows you that 12.5% means 1 out of 8 games they won.
Exactly.
So the other 7 they lost, including the majority of games at home.
Yeah.
So there.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So the Arizona Coyotes have, they play the best against the Edmonton Oilers, actually. They've won 75% of their games. Another statistic that I probably wouldn't have guessed.
Totally shocked. And they played the worst against the Boston Bruins. They did not beat the Bruins at all in the last 4 years.
Not once.
Not once.
Like, I wouldn't have guessed that.
I never would have guessed
Arizona is an amazing team, but I still wouldn't have guessed that I would have assumed they probably won at least one against a team, but didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
Next on the list, speak of the devil, the Boston Bruins. They play the best against Arizona Coyotes, 100%.
100%.
If you can do the conversion.
Yeah. And they played the worst against the Anaheim Ducks, winning only 1 game out of those 8, which was 12.5%.
So Anaheim plays really well against Boston and really poor against Pittsburgh. We've already kind of figured that out in the first 3 ones we've done here.
Yeah, exactly.
Next on the list is Buffalo, and they play the best against Arizona and San Jose.
What?
Both 75%.
What?
Buffalo wins 75% of the games against San Jose.
That's not possible.
I don't understand.
Brad, your computer's broken. Just kidding. It isn't. That's an amazing stat.
Yeah.
I'm very shocked. And they played the worst against the Chicago Blackhawks. A little more believable number there.
Yeah.
Chicago's a very dominant team. And in the last 4 years, Buffalo never beat Chicago.
Not once.
So
0%.
0. Yeah.
Next on the list is Calgary, and they play the best against Edmonton and New Jersey at 75%. I wouldn't have guessed that either.
No.
Usually you see inter-division teams have a pretty good rivalry, and they kind of go back and forth.
Yeah, 75%. And of course, they're in the same conference. So they're playing each other, 5, 6 times?
Yeah, they're in the same
like
division,
that.
so they play each other 5 times in the West.
Yeah, so those 75% is over a lot more games.
Yeah, it's basically 20 games, something
really.
like that. So
yeah,
that's huge.
So that's 15 games out of 20.
Yeah, basically 15 out of that's
really
impressive.
something.
Yeah.
And their worst performance is, as we probably already know, against the Anaheim Ducks.
Yeah.
21.25%. And we know from listening to media over the course of the playoffs that all of those wins were at home, and none of them were in Anaheim.
Exactly. Next on the list is Carolina. They play the best against the Arizona Coyotes, and they're at 75% there in the last 4 years.
Yeah, and the worst performance was against both Minnesota and Vancouver, of all teams, winning only 12.5% of the games against those two.
Another bit of a shock there with Vancouver.
Really? Yeah.
Coming to the powerhouse of the Chicago Blackhawks, and they play the best against the Buffalo Sabres, 100%, if you remember the statistic for Buffalo earlier.
Yeah, and their worst performance is against two fairly good teams, one better than the other, I guess, Tampa Bay and Washington, at only 25% of the games they played against them. Yeah. Interesting.
Next is Colorado, and they play the best against New Jersey with 87.50% winning percent chance. So that's impressive.
That's very impressive. And the worst performance, and this is quite an expected number, 25% only against the Washington Capitals.
Yeah, that's believable.
Yeah.
Next on the list is the Columbus Blue Jackets, and they play the best against the Philadelphia Flyers at 76.47%.
And they played the worst against the Nashville Predators and the Winnipeg Jets, winning only 25% of their games with each of those two teams.
Kind of interesting there as well.
Really it is. It really is.
The Dallas Stars play the best against the Vancouver Canucks at 91.67%.
That's a big number.
That's a big number.
And they're all in the West here, so they play each other more often.
Yep.
So that's a lot of games. That's why the number is so precise. It's you're dividing more beans in the pot there.
Exactly.
And their worst performance was against, pick one, 4 different teams. They only won 25%. That's Columbus, Montreal, New York, and Toronto. So the Dallas Stars, when they play any of those 4 teams, or have played in the past over the last 4 years, they were highly unlikely to win.
Yeah.
So.
Detroit, they play the best against Nashville and Vancouver at 75%.
And they played the worst against Tampa Bay, 22.22%.
An interdivisional team there.
That's right.
So it looks like Tampa Bay dominates that matchup.
Yeah, really.
Next on the list is Edmonton, and they play the best against the Florida Panthers at 75%.
Edmonton has, they only win 25%, and there's a several-team tie for this factor.
Half the league here.
Arizona, Chicago, Columbus, Minnesota, Nashville, Pittsburgh, and Toronto. 7 teams that the Edmonton Oilers only beat 25% of the time in the last 4 years.
Yeah, that's not good.
You got to fix that.
So the Florida Panthers are next, and they play the best against the Buffalo Sabres at 70.59%. So an interdivisional matchup there again as well. So.
Mm-hmm. And not a big surprise.
No.
Their worst performance is against what we already saw from a previous video, is a very strong team overall in the last 4 years, and that's the Boston Bruins. And in games against Boston, the Florida Panthers in the last 4 years won only 16.67% of the time.
So another interdivisional matchup here going on. Interesting to see this.
Very.
If I was a betting man, when I was doing some pro line, I'd probably pay attention to these statistics.
Yes, and of course, if you're a betting man, you probably already know too that those are the last 4 years.
Yeah,
and
predicting the past, not the future.
Lightning might not strike the same way. Yeah.
Okay, Los Angeles is next, and they play the best against the Florida Panthers at 75%.
Which is, I think that I'm not surprised by that.
No, not really surprised.
Their worst performance was against the Anaheim Ducks, just next door, 30% of the time. So,
I guess they don't play well close to home.
I guess
on
not.
The road.
I guess not.
Minnesota's next, and they play the best against Carolina and Toronto, both at 87.50%.
Yeah, so that's 7 games out of 8 that Minnesota has won against those 2 teams in the last 4 years. They played worst against Columbus, the Devils, Philadelphia, and Washington, winning only 2 of those 8 games with those teams.
New Jersey being in there surprises me.
Yeah,
heavily actually.
So. Yeah, 25% total is the best they can do there.
This next one, as a Canadiens fan, since Montreal's next, I wouldn't have picked this team.
Absolutely not.
But Montreal plays the best against the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Who knew?
88.24%. That's huge.
But that's not possible, because I remember so many Saturday nights going to bed in the last 4 years where I went to bed mad.
Yeah.
Because Montreal lost to Toronto. But again, Brad's computer obviously is not broken. But my recollection, when Montreal plays Toronto, I don't even bite my nails usually, but I'm kind of like this, because I usually dread Toronto games. I should be eating them up.
You should be celebrating.
I should be celebrating. 88.24%, that's nuts. Montreal has 2 teams that they play very poorly against, or the most poorly, and those in the last 4 years have been the Chicago Blackhawks and the San Jose Sharks, with only 12.5% for each of those teams.
Well, if any team's going to beat my number 1 team, the Montreal Canadiens, hopefully it's my number 2 team, the San Jose Sharks, so I'm glad to see them on this list.
And the other team that was built by the guy who's now building the Montreal Canadiens, Marc Bergevin. So, you can take that. Montreal fans, I think, can take that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Next is Nashville, and they play the best against Buffalo, Columbus, Edmonton, Ottawa, and Tampa Bay, all at 88.24%. That blows my mind.
That is phenomenal.
To play that well against that many specific teams, that's huge.
And that's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams. And of course, they're almost all in the East. No, I guess they are all in the East now. Just Columbus is in the East now too, right?
Yeah.
No, Edmonton's not. Sorry, there's Edmonton. That's a lot of games. And if you're winning 88.4% of a lot of games, you're winning a lot of games.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really good. Their worst performance, funnily, is against Detroit, that hasn't been a great team, and Philadelphia, that hasn't been a great team. What's with that? 25% performance against those two teams for Nashville.
For whatever reason, just some weird
Maybe they get the yips.
Here. The yips, yeah. New Jersey's next, and they play the best against Buffalo and Minnesota at 75%.
Mm-hmm. And they play the worst against Colorado and St. Louis at only 12.5%, or 1 game out of 8.
You got a very good team in St. Louis and an interestingly poor team recently with Colorado. So
yeah, funny.
Big contrast there. Next is the Islanders. They play the best against the New Jersey Devils at 76.47%. And that shocked me.
Me too.
Number one, because geographically they're so close. And number two, the rivalry, obviously, in that whole trifecta area of teams.
Yeah.
New York, Islanders, and New Jersey. So
it's almost really a cross-town rivalry, even though you're in a different state, but you're just across the river. It's all one big metropolitan area.
Yeah.
And to have that kind of dominance in teams that play each other a lot,
Yeah, they would play each other 4 times in the East. It's 5 in the West,
because of
interdivisional, and 4 in the East interdivisional because of the balance problem.
And their worst performance is against Chicago and Montreal at 25%, so 2 games out of 8.
Yeah. I may have put Toronto on that list compared. Speaking of how poorly they played against Toronto when we saw them earlier this year, they lost 7-1. So.
7-1.
The Rangers are next, and they play the best against the Arizona Coyotes at 87.50%.
Mm-hmm. And their worst performance is against Montreal, another one that I'm surprised.
Well, considering that New York beat Montreal in the playoffs this year, thumbs down to those statistics.
Yeah, but they are right. 25% of the time, New York beats Montreal. The other 75%, they lose.
Crazy.
I'll take it.
Ottawa Senators are next, and they play the best against the Boston Bruins at 70.59%, which probably holds true to what happened in the playoffs this year. So
it's one of the few things that does match up with what you're thinking. Their worst performance is against the Nashville Predators at 25%. So if you could project that, let's say Ottawa had gotten into the finals against Nashville, it might not have looked good.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
It almost worked out.
Almost.
The Philadelphia Flyers, they play the best against Minnesota and Winnipeg, both at 75%.
Mm-hmm. And their worst performance is against the Anaheim Ducks.
0, if you can't remember from the beginning of the Anaheim one. 0%. So that's another one of those really spooky, weird things.
Yeah.
Next is Pittsburgh, and they play the best against the Buffalo Sabres at 91.67%. Doesn't really surprise me.
Not a shock. The worst performance is against the Chicago Blackhawks.
Which, if Pittsburgh wasn't a great team, it might be a bit of a shocker, but arguably Pittsburgh has been as good or better than Chicago in the last 4 years. So to only see them win 12.5% of the games is odd.
It is odd. Yeah. They should have done better, everything else being equal, but it's not equal, I guess.
San Jose Sharks, and this is great news for me because my 2 favorite teams play the best against the Toronto Maple Leafs. 100% for San Jose against the Toronto Maple Leafs in the last 4 years, so thumbs up.
And their worst performance, well, I guess we already knew this because we did Buffalo a while ago, but the Buffalo Sabres, 25%.
Yeah, can't beat Buffalo.
They can't. What is wrong?
How can you beat Toronto 100% of the time and only beat Buffalo 25% of the time? That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense. It could be a factor, there's other things going into play here.
Totally.
San Jose's playing Buffalo, a weak team. That's maybe the day they decide to start the backup goalie.
Exactly.
Things like that are probably working into this. But.
And if they're traveling and they're going into Toronto for the first night, rested, 100% win. The very next day they go down to Buffalo, tired, lose.
Those kinds of things, yeah. So there's reasons for all these numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's so many factors.
But if you get really high in the altitude and look down at them without the reasons, that's when we get the fun.
Yeah. St. Louis Blues, they play the best against the Arizona Coyotes at 91.67%. Another impressive number there.
Very impressive.
But not shocking.
Very impressive. Their worst performance over the time, and interestingly, their worst performance against any team is a three-way tie, and it's 37.5%.
Pretty specific number there.
Very, very specific. That's 3 out of 8.
Yeah.
So that means 3 times out of 8 against all 4 of those teams, or 3 of those teams, Detroit, Ottawa, and Washington, St. Louis is still winning games.
Yeah.
So even when you're having a bad day,
Yeah.
you're still having a pretty good day.
Still having a pretty good day, yeah.
And that goes totally fitting with the St. Louis record that we did in a previous
Exactly.
video.
They were the only team over 60% as far
win
as
percentage.
Winning percentage in the last 4 years.
Yeah, and there's probably why.
Yeah.
Even when they do poorly, they still do pretty well.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Tampa Bay Lightning, and they play the best against Carolina at 83.33%.
Yeah. Probably not a big surprise. Maybe a little higher than I thought it would be. But yeah. Their worst performance is against Nashville, the Sharks, the Blues, and the Capitals, winning only 25% of the time against those 4 teams.
Toronto is next, and they play the best against Dallas and Edmonton at 75%.
Mm-hmm. And as bad as Toronto plays against Montreal,
they play worse.
They play worse against the San Jose Sharks, as you already know because we covered them just a moment ago. 0% of the time was Toronto able to beat San Jose in the last 4 years.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
Third last on the list is Vancouver, and they play the best against the Carolina Hurricanes at 87.50%. I wouldn't have predicted that probably.
No, me neither. Not at all. The worst performance is a surprise as well. Dallas. I mean, Dallas has not been, a super powerhouse over 4 years. They've had good years, but winning only 8.33% of the time, that's bad for Vancouver.
Yeah, very bad.
Yeah.
Capitals, the second last team, they play the best against the Boston Bruins at 83.33%.
Mm-hmm. And worst is against Dallas. At 12.5%. What did we just talk about?
Dallas can't beat Vancouver, but they can beat Washington.
Well, it's actually the other way around. Dallas is really big against Vancouver and really able to beat Washington, but they're a team that does not do well against teams they should be.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
Yeah. All right.
Last is Winnipeg, and they play the best against Arizona, Columbus, New Jersey, and Toronto, all at 75%.
75%. And the worst performance, this is not an unexpected stat, against the Pittsburgh Penguins, they win only 12.5% of the time, which is 1 game out of the 8 that they played in the last 4 years.
Exactly, yeah. So, so many surprises in this list. Some not so surprises, but overall, a very fun exercise to go through these statistics. So, Brad, thank you again for doing that. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, great fun.
Let us know down in the comments what statistics surprised you the most. For me, it was probably the Anaheim beating Philadelphia 100% of the time.
For me, it was the amount of wins that Montreal had against Toronto. I would have thought it was maybe 50 or 60% of the time because I come from the era of the 60s and 70s and early 80s when Montreal was icing really, really good teams and Toronto was not. But Toronto always seemed to be able to get up for Montreal, and even recently, that's the impression I have in my life, and I guess it hasn't been there in the numbers.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt the same way. I would have never guessed that.
Never.
Thank you guys very much for watching this video. We really appreciate it. Another big thanks to Brad for doing this for us. If you like this video, hit the like button. That always helps us. If you're new to the channel, hope you hit subscribe and join us here. We're always making daily hockey content. So we'll see you in the future. Adios.